All right, and we're back here with video 4 of building and designing beautiful websites from scratch. Today we'll talk about CSS. We'll start to think about layout, and we'll start to actually lay out our sample website onto a grid. Um, so just to run through the agenda, we're going to quickly review CSS. We kind of quickly covered it in the end of the last video, and I want to reinforce some of the syntax and ideas of CSS. I want to again reinforce the concepts of IDs and classes in HTML. Talk about 3 CSS layout options, and then do a really quick intro into gridding and actually laying out our sample website onto a grid. So let's get rolling. So the first thing I want to do is I want to quickly talk about CSS syntax again. And so just to kind of point out, this comes from W3 Schools, just to kind of point out the different components or syntax of CSS. We've got our selector. This is the thing that we're selecting, the thing that we want to style or change. In this case, in this example, H1. We've got our declaration. So really 2 main things, our selector and our declaration. Within the declaration, we've got 2 things. We have properties. So what property of the selected item do we want to change? And then we have a value. What do we actually want to change it to? So for example, I want to change the color, that's the property of our H1 tag, to blue, that's the value. Here's another example. I want to change the font size, that's a property, to a specific size, 12 pixels. Okay, and you can put as many properties and values, you can attach as many declarations or properties and values to a selector as you want. So for example, this only has 2 changes. We could add 10 more if we wanted to. And we divide declarations using a semicolon. Quickly, I want to run through IDs and classes again. So just as a reminder, IDs and classes are ways to uniquely identify HTML tags. So again, HTML tags are finite, meaning there's a specific set number of tags, and if we want to then make more nuanced design changes to particular HTML tags, we need to add some uniqueness to them. And one way to do that, or 2 ways to do that really, are either attaching an ID to an HTML element or a class. I didn't really differentiate between the 2 in the last video, so I'll do that here for you now. IDs are wholly unique in that they can only occur one time on an HTML page. So for example, you might use an ID if you have one specific type of picture, image that you have, and it will never occur again on the entire website. Classes are different in that you can use them multiple times. The way I sort of differentiate them, or a trick I use, is I think of them as classes of students. There's lots of students in a particular class. And so you can use classes more than one time. So we can attach this multiple times to HTML elements. As a general rule of thumb, if you just make everything a class, you're pretty safe. I know people that are more advanced in web design are probably cringing at that, but I just kind of operate under that sort of underlying assumption. Just use classes and you're pretty much safe. Now, the next thing, so kind of what we did in the last video is we made some really simple changes, right? We changed font size, font color, things like that. The next real big component of CSS is layout, right? So layout, when we talk about layout, we're talking about how are the different elements on the page arranged, both vertically and horizontally, okay? So back in the day when web design was just getting started in the 90s, people used to lay out websites in tables, right? So just like you might in a Microsoft Word document, right? You want 3 columns, you make a 3-column table. As you can imagine, that's really not sustainable, in particular because of mobile devices, but also it's just not a flexible way to lay things out. And so tables are sort of a big no-no. So don't use tables to lay out your websites. The second option is using what is called a CSS float. And so you can float div elements, divider elements, either left or right. And you can sort of move elements around the page that way. Floating is really what Bootstrap, if you've ever heard of Bootstrap before, is really built on. Floating is really what we'll focus on and use primarily for the purposes of this tutorial. And then the third way is what's called Flexbox. Flexbox is a newer technology and really something that I'll probably do a video on here soon, but is a little harder to grasp. But once you do grasp it, it's much more powerful than floating. We won't talk too much about Flexbox, but it's a really neat technology that we'll talk about maybe sometime in the future. Okay, so layouts. One way to lay things out, and I think a really sort of best practice to lay things out, is on a grid. So grids help us lay out things by setting specific widths to specific elements. They're usually divided into 12 equal columns. We'll take a look at that in a second. And websites are chopped up into rows and columns. So let me just walk you through, there's this website blog post that I found by Revelation Concept, and it's a tutorial about designing a custom page template. But I think what was cooler was this idea of wireframing, and it walks you through sort of the process of wireframing. And what I thought was really neat is that it had these screenshots. So I appreciate Revelation Concept for sharing this with everyone. So basically what you're looking at here is a 12-column grid. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay? So one column, so we've got 12 columns from pink to pink here. So this is sort of step one, is you've got a blank grid. Step two is you start to think about the different elements on your website. So here's a header that seems to span all 12 columns. Here's another header, or I mean, here's an animation that they want to put in that will also span all 12 columns. Now what they're doing is there's more elements that have different widths. So right now this is 3 equal widths, 3 columns of equal width. And if we think about, when we think about gridding, we think about how many columns does it span. So CTA1 here spans 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. CTA2 spans 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. CTA3 also spans 1, 2, 3, 4. So again, they add up to 12, 4 plus 4 plus 4, and they're equal width. So you can see that this row has 3 columns of 4. This row also has 3 columns, but they're not equal width. So the first one is half the screen, so it spans 6 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then the other 2 columns span the other half. So we divide 6 by 2, or half of 6 is 3, so 1, 2, 3 for last tweet, and 1, 2, 3 for email form. So again, when we're thinking about laying things out on a grid, what we're doing is we're chopping up all of the content first in rows and then in columns. So this is one row. It's got 3 columns in it. This is another row that's got 3 columns in it. So that's a really important concept to understand. And then they have some more, they've got some more screenshots that show sort of the next steps. So again, if you look at this entire site now, sort of laid out, it's one row, that's a header. Row 2 is this animation / CTA thing. Row 3 is 3 columns, equal width. And row 4 is 3 columns, different widths. So we've got 4 rows here of content. and this is what it looks like with actual content in it. Right? So I think it's just a really neat example to show you, starting with just a blank grid and then proceeding through chopping up the content into rows and columns, what it actually would look like in the end. Okay, so that's sort of the idea of gridding. Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll create a mock-up based on a website that we pulled up last video for some inspiration, and sort of clarify how we're going to create our grid. And so what we'll do is, this is peaks-place.com. This is from our last video. And what I really liked about this, this website in particular was its layout. And so what we'll do is we'll kind of steal its layout a little bit. We'll use the same kind of header, this same kind of hero image. And then what I really liked was this 50-50 layout, right? So half of the screen was text, half of the screen's image, half of the screen's image, half of the screen's text, sort of this checkered layout. And then we'll also steal their footer, where they've got 3 columns. They've got sort of sitemap, one for their newsletter, and one for contact information. So what we'll do is we'll kind of steal this. And I'm on a website called wireframe.cc, and I really love this website because you can actually just sort of create mock-ups on the fly, and it's really lo-fi and it's really easy to use. And so what I'll do is I'm going to recreate our layout on this 12-column grid. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 columns. Okay, so our header is going to span all 12 columns, and I'm just going to create a box. Our hero image is going to span all 12 columns. Just going to say that's an image. And then we really liked the 50-50 layout. So that's going to span 6 columns, 6 of our 12 columns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is going to be an image. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is going to be, I'm going to make it a box. And I wonder if I can make this taller so that I can resize these and make them a little bit more kind of how we wanted our layout. Okay, and then our footer, which we will kind of just start right here, was going to be, it looks like a third, and a half. So we'll do, so if we divide by 12, we'll do 3, part of the footer will be 3, part of the footer will be 6, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the last part of the footer will be 3. Okay, so we've got 3 columns in this row. Just kind of try to line them up. 3 columns in this row. One is going to span 3 columns, one is going to span 6, and another is going to span 3. And as you can see, they all add up to 12. Okay. So what we'll do is we'll open up our website from the last video. And what I want to show you is where we left off. So if I open up the index file from our last video, this is where we left off. And our hope then is to transform this into something that resembles this layout. So really the process of getting from layout, from mockup to layout is a multi-step process. And so the first thing that we need to do And this is all achieved through both HTML and CSS. And really drawing on those concepts that we talked about earlier in the video. And so that's why those concepts are important to understand. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to use a pre-made 12-column grid. This is a 12-column grid that I created. And this is a CSS file. And so you'll notice in my folder here it's called 12-column-grid.css. I will attach this file to the notes in the YouTube video so that you can download it and you can just drag it right into the folder of the website that you're creating alongside me. So you'll use this exact column. Basically, what I want to do is I want to show you, walk through just a little bit of what's happening here in this column, in this CSS file. So basically, what we've got here is we've got our 12-column grid. We've got these classes that we've created. So in CSS, a class is the selector of a class is this period, and then the class name. And so what you'll notice is we've got a bunch of numbers here, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then we also have a class called row. And so basically what I've done here is I've created a grid based on our 12-column layout. And the main thing that sort of, there's two main things happening in this CSS file. One, there's a class called row, right? And so if we remember, all websites are just laid out into a series of rows. So our website that we're laying out is 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows, 4 rows. So we've got a class called row, and the different properties for a row are it spans 100% of the screen, and this clear both essentially means when you create a row in your HTML file, it will start on a new line. It's basically like a line break. So you create a row here, and once you create another row, it will automatically start on the next line. These columns then, so all websites are laid out in a series of rows, and inside of the rows are a series of columns, right? So we've got 4 rows, and for example, this third row has 2 columns, one that spans half the screen and another that spans half the screen. And so since our whole screen is 12 columns, half of that would be 6. So if we go up and we see, oh, okay, a class of 6 is going to go 49% of the screen, and another class of 6 is going to go another 49% of the screen. So basically 50-50 layout. Okay. So the whole purpose of this CSS file is to basically create all of the classes you would need to work on a 12-column grid. And so if you have, for example, this column, which spans 3 rows, you would just use this class, div class 3. Okay? And so you don't have to know everything that's happening in this CSS file. And really, I just encourage you to take the entire file and copy it into your folder. Make sure you're linking to it in your HTML file, and I'll show you how to do that in 1 second here. But the main purpose is to see that this corresponds with our grid, our 12-column grid. There's no 12 because 12 is just a new row, right? So it's 1 through 11. If you have something that you want to span the entire row, you just call it row. So that's the CSS that's sort of controlling our grid. We'll close this, and then the other thing you need to do before we move on is you need to make sure that you're linking to the style sheet. So what we've did is, what I've done is I've just copied and pasted this link to the style.css right below, and I changed the file name to 12-column-grid.css. So now I'm linking to both my style.css and my grid file. Okay, So the next step then is to actually, in the HTML, insert all of the different divs, dividing elements, that will allow us to lay our content out on a grid. So we'll do that now. So the way we'll do this is we'll work in HTML. And so because we've already, so we'll open up index.html. Because we've already integrated our 12-column grid in CSS, which I explained previously, now what we can do is we can add our classes that correspond with our grid. So what we can do is we can start with our first row, which is our header content. And so the first thing I want us to do is I want us to include all of the rows first in our HTML. So we've got 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows, 4 rows. Okay? So to do that, we can start with our header, right? So if we look at our header in HTML, that's this section right here. I want to put everything in our header inside of a row. So we'll do div class row, and we'll close the row where the header closes, right after the header closes. And then another thing we'll do is we'll do what's called a HTML comment. To do a comment, you do a caret, an exclamation point, and then dash dash. Then anything inside isn't actual code, it's just a way to remind yourself of what's happening. So since we're going to introduce a bunch of different divs, we're going to chop up this HTML file into a bunch of different divs. What we'll have to do is comment so we can be reminded of where the different rows close. So we have our header row introduced in HTML. Next is our hero image row. And we already have the div class hero image, so we'll do div class row. I will say row closes here again. And so we're just sort of chopping up the document, the HTML document, into various rows. So row 1, row 2, now row 3 is our image and our text. So we'll go find that. Here's our image. So we'll div class row. And again, we want to surround the entire row. So here's our image. Here's our content. We'll close it here. And then we'll comment row closes here again. And then lastly, so there's our third row. So again, we're just chopping it up into multiple rows. And then our fourth row is here in the footer. And what we'll do is we'll just go div class row again. And we'll put everything inside of the row, inside of the footer, inside of a new row. So if we just sort of recap, we've got 1 row here, that is our header. 1 row here, that's our hero image. 1 row here, that is our content, our image here, and our text here. And then 1 row here, that's our footer. Okay? So what you may have noticed though is we don't have columns yet. We only have rows. So what we want to do is we want to introduce columns next. Okay, so our first 2 rows span all 12 columns, so we don't have to do anything, right? So they're just rows unto themselves. The only time we start to see columns are here, where we have our image and our content. So what we'll do now is we'll skip past the first row, skip past the second row, and start here in the third row. And so the first column in the third row is this image. So what we can do is we can wrap this content image in a column that spans 6 columns of the grid. And I'm going to just put a comment here. Column 6 closes here. Right? So we're just chopping up the content even more. Right? So we've got a row, and inside the row we've got 2 columns. So we've got our first column, which is 6, and we've got our second column, which is also 6. And we want to close that column before the row closes. So again, I want to comment here, column 6 closes here to remind us that's where it closes. And so let's just recap what we did in this row. So this row, this entire row here, is encompassing this with 2 columns, one with the image, one with the text. So here's our entire row that's highlighted. Here's column 1 that spans 6. Here's column 2 that spans 6. Okay? And then finally, our footer has 3 columns. One that spans 3, one that spans 6, and one that spans 3. We don't actually have the content for that, so what I'll do is I'll add some dummy content. So we'll just say sitemap, and then I'm just going to copy and paste the entire nav bar. Where the sitemap is. And then the middle section we'll just call sign up form, and then we just won't have, we'll just put some placeholder text. Here's where the sign up form goes. Okay, so now we've got our 3 sections. This one, which is our sitemap. So what we'll do now is we will do, again, just chop these up into multiple sections. So div class 3, and then we'll just say column 3 closes here. Again, just good practice to remind us where these things close. Our sign up form is going to span 6. So we'll just go here and we'll go div class 6. And we'll just say column 6 closes here. And then lastly is this section, div class 3. Column 3 closes here. Feel free to pause the video at any point and make sure you're getting all of this correctly. What you'll notice though is they always add up to 12, right? So 3 plus 6 is 9, plus 3 is 12. Again, because we're on a 12 column grid, 12 spans the entire width of the content. Okay, so I'm going to save and I'm going to refresh, and we're going to notice some major changes. We're going to see things that, most notably in the footer here. In the next video, we'll start to introduce images, but for now, this is where I want to leave off. So we've inserted basically all of the infrastructure for our row. Ooh, what did I do here? We've inserted all of the infrastructure for our row. Oops. Sorry guys, I accidentally deleted my navigation bar at the top. For our layout. So it doesn't really look like this yet, but it's starting to look like it. But what's missing really is the images and things like that. So this is where I want to leave off. Your file should look something like this. But really the whole point was to get our rows and our columns inserted into our grid. And so that's where we'll leave off. We'll pick up next time with inserting the images.